sir. The little girl didn't cry when the cashier told her the total. She just stared at the screen like she was trying to solve a math problem, too big for her small hands. $7.84, the cashier repeated, tapping her long acrylic nail against the counter. The store was quiet, except for the humming refrigerator behind the drinks aisle. Outside, rain tapped against the glass like impatient fingers. The girl slowly opened her tiny pink wallet. The zipper was broken. Coins spilled into her palm. She counted carefully. Once, twice, then she swallowed. "I only have $2.17, she whispered. The words weren't loud, but they hit Dominic Russo like a gunshot. He stood 3 people behind her in line, broad shoulders filling his charcoal overcoat, silver threading through his dark hair. At 51, Dominic was still imposing, not because he tried to be, but because power clung to him like a shadow. Men in this city crossed the street to avoid him. Judges lowered their tone around him. But right now, none of that mattered. The girl looked at the counter again. A loaf of cheap white bread, a small jar of peanut butter, and a box of generic bandages. Bandages, the cashier sighed. "Then you'll have to put something back, honey." The girl's fingers tightened around the coins. She didn't cry, she just nodded and picked up the peanut butter. Dominic moved before he realized he was moving. "Add whatever else she needs," he said, placing a black, "Sir." Card on the counter. The cashier blinked. "Sir? You heard me." His voice wasn't loud. It didn't have to be. The girl turned slowly. Big hazel eyes, wet but defiant. "I don't need more," she said softly. "Just this." Dominic crouched down to her level. The floor of the convenience store creaked under his weight. "What's your name?" he asked. "Lily." "How old are you, Lily?" 6. He nodded once. "Why the bandages?" She hesitated. Her lower lip trembled, but she forced it steady. "My mom fell again." Again. The word lodged in his chest. "Where is she?" "At home." "Is she hurt bad?" "She says she's okay." Lily looked down at the bread. "But she can't walk good." Dominic felt something inside him tighten, not the sharp anger he was used to, but something slower, heavier. He stood and handed the cashier his card. "Add milk," he said, "eggs, and real food." Lily frowned. "We don't need yes," he said gently. "You do." He carried the bags. Lily insisted she could help. She carried the bread and bandages like they were treasure. Outside, Queens felt colder than it should have in early October. Rain slicked the sidewalks, neon lights reflecting in puddles. Dominic walked half a step behind her, scanning everything out of habit: parked cars, dark windows, alleyways. Protection was instinct. They reached a worn brick building with flickering hallway lights. "This is us," Lily said. The stairwell smelled like damp concrete and old paint. 3 flights up. Lily climbed. "Sir," carefully, glancing back to make sure he was still there. "Apartment 3C. She unlocked the door. "Mom?" she called. The apartment was small but clean. A thin blanket covered a couch. Bills were stacked neatly on a folding table. The heater clanked but gave little warmth. On the couch, a woman in her early 30s tried to sit up. Her face was pale. A bruise darkened her temple. Her ankle was wrapped poorly in what looked like a torn dish towel. When she saw Dominic, fear flickered across her eyes. "Lily," she breathed. "Who is this?" "He helped me," Lily said proudly. "We didn't have enough." The woman tried to stand. She winced sharply. Dominic set the groceries down and stepped forward. "Don't." "I'm fine," she insisted, gripping the couch. He looked at her ankle, swollen. Wrong angle. Not from a simple fall. "What happened?" he asked. She hesitated just long enough. "Stairs." He didn't believe her. He had seen too many stairs injuries in his lifetime. "I'm Dominic," he said. "Claire," she replied, holding his gaze. Her voice was steady, but her eyes weren't. Dominic felt it then, the same instinct he trusted in negotiations, in war, in survival. Someone had done this to her. Lily tugged his coat. "Mom falls a lot." Claire's jaw tightened. "Lily." Dominic crouched again, softer this time. "Does someone push your mom, Lily?" Silence filled the room. Claire's voice cut through it. "That's enough." Her eyes met Dominic's again, warning him. Protecting someone. Or protecting, sir, herself. He straightened slowly. "You need a doctor," he said. "I can't afford one." He studied the apartment again. No television. No decorations except a small framed photo on the wall, Claire smiling beside a man in a construction helmet. Your husband? Dominic asked quietly. Claire nodded. He passed 3 years ago. Widowed. The word settled heavily. Lily climbed onto the couch beside her mother and carefully opened the box of bandages. I'll fix it, she said seriously. Dominic looked at the little girl wrapping gauze around a swollen ankle with clumsy tenderness. $2.17, that was all she had. He had spent more than that on a single espresso in Manhattan. And yet this child was carrying a weight heavier than most grown men he knew. I'll send someone, he said finally. Claire's expression hardened. We don't need charity. This isn't charity. Then what is it? He paused. He wasn't sure, but he knew one thing: he wasn't walking out of that apartment and pretending he hadn't seen this. It's temporary, he said. A doctor, just to look. Claire hesitated. Pride battled pain across her face. Finally, she nodded once. Fine. Dominic stepped toward the door, then stopped. If someone did this to you, he said quietly, he won't do it again. Her breath caught. You don't know anything, she whispered. You're right, he replied calmly. Not yet. He walked down the stairs slower than he had climbed them. By the time he reached the street, rain had stopped. He pulled out his phone. Marco, he said when the line connected. Yes, boss. I need you to look into someone. Name? Claire Bennett, Queens, and anyone who's been near her in the last 6 months. A pause. Is this business? Dominic looked back up at the flickering window of apartment 3C. For now, he said quietly. It's personal. As he slid into the back of his black sedan, something unfamiliar settled in his chest. Not rage, not strategy, something fragile. Something he hadn't felt since before his wife died. The image of a 6-year-old girl standing at a counter, whispering she only had $2.17, and Dominic Russo, the man who controlled half the city, realized for the first time in years there were things money couldn't fix, but he was about to try anyway. By sunrise, Dominic Russo already knew more about Claire Bennett than most people ever would. He sat alone in his Manhattan penthouse office, floor-to-ceiling windows casting gray morning light across polished marble floors. The city looked obedient from up here, small, manageable, predictable. Unlike what he'd seen in apartment 3C, Marco stood across from his desk, tablet in hand. Claire Bennett, 32, certified nurse's assistant, works part-time at St. Mary's Rehabilitation Center. Marco began. Widowed. Husband Daniel Bennett died in a construction site accident 3 years ago. No payout beyond basic insurance. Dominic nodded once. And? Marco, sir, hesitated. 6 months ago, she filed a restraining order against a Raymond Doyle. Dominic's jaw tightened slightly. Background .37, prior arrest for assault, connected loosely to a small-time loan operation in Queens. Charges dismissed. Lack of evidence, of course. Dominic leaned back in his leather chair, fingers steepled. Relationship? He started showing up after her husband died. Offered financial help. It escalated. Dominic didn't need further explanation. He had seen men like Raymond Doyle his entire life, predators who disguised control as protection. And the restraining order? Denied. He claimed she was unstable. No witnesses. Dominic exhaled slowly. And last night? He asked. Marco glanced at his screen. He was seen near her building 3 nights ago. That was enough. Find him, Dominic said calmly. I want him watched. Marco didn't ask what would happen next. He had worked beside Dominic for 25 years. He knew the tone, controlled, cold, decided. That evening, Dominic returned to Queens. This time, he didn't come alone. A private physician, discreet and highly paid, climbed the stairs behind him, carrying a small medical case. Lily opened the door before he knocked. You came back, she exclaimed, as if surprised but hopeful. Dominic felt something unfamiliar warm his chest. I said I would. Claire was sitting upright this time, though her face tightened the moment she saw the doctor. You brought someone, she said flatly. Sir. Yes. I told you we can't afford her not paying. The doctor examined her ankle carefully. The diagnosis was worse than Dominic expected. Severe ligament damage, the doctor said quietly, and I'd strongly suspect it was caused by impact, not a simple fall. Claire's eyes flashed. That's enough. The doctor finished wrapping her ankle properly and prescribed medication before leaving. When the door shut, silence filled the apartment. Dominic stood near the small kitchen counter, hands in his coat pockets. "You didn't fall," he said calmly. Claire stared at him. "Why does it matter to you?" He didn't answer immediately, because the truth was complicated. It mattered because he saw Lily counting coins. It mattered because Claire's eyes carried the same quiet exhaustion his late wife once had, the kind that came from holding too much alone. It mattered because Dominic Russo had built an empire protecting his own, and something about that tiny apartment felt like it belonged under his protection now. "Because," he said finally, "men like him don't stop unless someone makes them." Claire's breath hitched almost invisibly. "You don't even know him, Donal." "Raymond Doyle," Dominic said evenly. The color drained from her face. "How do I make it my business to know things?" Lily looked between them, confused. "Who's Raymond?" "No one," Claire said quickly. Dominic crouched in front of Lily. "He won't bother you or your mom anymore." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise, sir. Later that night, Raymond Doyle was dragged into a quiet warehouse in Brooklyn. There were no screams, no spectacle. Dominic sat in a chair across from him, coat still on, expression unreadable. Raymond's bravado cracked the moment he recognized the man in front of him. "I didn't know she was yours," Raymond stammered. Dominic's eyes were ice. "She's not mine? Then why?" Dominic leaned forward slightly. "You mistake me. I don't need ownership to decide what's unacceptable." Raymond swallowed. "I didn't touch the kid," he rushed out. Dominic's jaw tightened. "You touched her mother." Silence. Raymond tried to recover his confidence. "It was between us. She owed me money." For what?" Raymond hesitated. Dominic already knew. After Daniel Bennett died, Claire had borrowed $3,000 to cover rent and medical bills. Raymond had offered help that came with interest and fists. Dominic stood slowly. "If you go within 2 blocks of that building again," he said quietly, "you won't like how this ends." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Raymond believed him, and belief was more powerful than violence. Dominic walked out, leaving Raymond shaking. "Make sure he relocates," Dominic told Marco. "Understood." But something unexpected happened over the next week. Dominic didn't just check in through reports. He showed up. He brought groceries again. Then winter coats. He arranged for Claire's rent to be anonymously covered for 3 months. At first, she, sir, resisted every gesture. "I don't need saving," she told him one evening. They were sitting across from each other at the tiny folding table. Lily was coloring in the corner. "I know," Dominic replied. "Then why are you doing this?" He studied her carefully. "Because someone should have helped sooner." Claire's eyes softened slightly. "You don't look like a man who does things without a reason." A faint smile touched his lips. "I don't." "Then what's the reason?" He glanced at Lily, who was humming to herself while drawing a lopsided house with 3 stick figures. "You remind me," he said quietly, "of someone I failed." Claire didn't push further, but something shifted between them that night. The air felt less defensive, less suspicious, more human. 2 weeks later, Claire could walk again slowly, but without pain shooting through her leg. Lily had started greeting Dominic at the door with hugs he pretended to tolerate, but secretly held on to longer than necessary. For the first time in years, Dominic found himself leaving his penthouse early just to stop by Queen's. His men noticed. Marco noticed. "You're changing," Marco said one evening in the car. Dominic stared out the window. "Am I? You're smiling more?" Dominic scoffed lightly. "Don't get used to it." But deep down he knew Marco was right. Then, on a quiet Thursday afternoon, everything shifted. Dominic arrived at apartment 3C to find the door slightly open. His body reacted before his mind did. He stepped inside, sir. Silently. The room was a mess. A chair knocked over, a shattered glass on the floor. Claire stood near the kitchen counter, pale and shaking, and Raymond Doyle was there. Blood trickled from his lip, but he was smiling. "I just wanted to talk," Raymond said casually. Dominic felt something cold and lethal settle into his chest. Lily was nowhere in sight. "Where is she?" Dominic asked, voice dangerously calm. Claire's eyes filled with terror. "She ran to Mrs. Alvarez downstairs," she whispered. Raymond laughed softly. "See? I didn't touch the kid." Dominic stepped forward. And for the first time since this began, the controlled, disciplined man who ruled New York let something darker rise closer to the surface. Not for power, not for business, but because a 6-year-old once stood in a grocery store holding $2.17, and he had promised she'd never feel that helpless again. Dominic didn't raise his voice. He didn't lunge. He didn't even look angry. And that was what terrified Raymond Doyle the most. The apartment felt smaller now, the air thicker. Claire stood frozen near the counter, her knuckles white, breath shallow. A broken glass glittered across the kitchen floor like scattered warning signs. Raymond wiped the blood from his lip with the back of his hand and smirked. "She owes me," he muttered. "You don't just erase debt because you show up in a nice coat." Dominic stepped fully inside and closed the door behind him. The click of the lock echoed, "Sir," louder than it should have. "She doesn't owe you anything," Dominic replied, voice level. "You preyed on a widow with a child." Raymond scoffed. "That's not illegal, Dono." Dominic agreed softly. "But touching her is." Claire's voice trembled. "He just barged in. Said the restraining order meant nothing." Raymond shrugged. "Court agreed with me." Dominic's gaze shifted to Claire's cheek. A faint redness, fresh. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Did you hit her?" Dominic asked. Raymond hesitated. That hesitation was enough. Dominic crossed the distance between them in 2 silent steps and grabbed Raymond by the collar, slamming him back against the wall. Not violently enough to cause serious harm, but enough to shatter the illusion of control Raymond had been clinging to. "You confuse mercy with weakness," Dominic said quietly. Raymond tried to push him off, but Dominic didn't budge. At 51, he was still solid, not just muscle, but presence. Years of command lived in his bones. "You don't scare me," Raymond spat, though his voice cracked. "That's fine," Dominic replied. "You don't need to be scared." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to something almost gentle. "You need to disappear." Raymond's bravado flickered. "You think you can just threaten me?" Dominic released him slowly, smoothing his coat as if nothing had happened. "I don't threaten," he said. "I make decisions." He looked at Claire. "Call the police," he told her calmly. "Raymond's, sir." Head snapped toward her. "You wouldn't." Dominic's eyes never left Claire's. "You deserve to be protected the right way." Claire hesitated, not because she didn't want to call, but because she knew the system had failed her before. Dominic saw the doubt. He nodded once. "I'll stay." That was enough. She reached for her phone. Raymond panicked. "This isn't over," he snapped, backing toward the door. Dominic stepped aside deliberately, allowing him to leave. Because sometimes letting a man walk out was more terrifying than stopping him. The door slammed. Silence followed. Claire's hands were shaking so badly she could barely dial. Dominic gently took the phone from her and completed the call, giving a concise, controlled report. When he hung up, she sank into the chair. "I thought he was gone," she whispered. "He should have been," Dominic replied. Her eyes lifted to his. "Who are you, really?" The question hung between them. Dominic hesitated for the first time since he'd walked in. He had built his entire life on secrecy, on separation between worlds. But this woman deserved honesty. "My name is Dominic Russo," he said quietly. Recognition flickered across her face, not fear, but realization. "You're that Russo." He didn't confirm it. He didn't deny it. "I don't bring danger to people I care about," he said instead. Claire swallowed. Care about? The word felt fragile. Dominic glanced toward the hallway. "Where's Lily?" "Mrs. Alvarez has her downstairs." He nodded. "I'll, sir, bring her up." When Lily ran into the apartment minutes later, she launched herself at Dominic without hesitation. "Is he gone?" she asked into his coat. "Yes," Dominic said firmly. "He's gone." She pulled back, studying his face like she could measure truth. "You promise?" Dominic looked into her hazel eyes, eyes that had counted coins instead of asking for help. "I promise." She hugged him tighter, and something inside Dominic cracked open completely. Not like glass this time. Like a locked door finally giving way. The police came and went. Statements were taken. Raymond would likely be held overnight, maybe longer this time. But Dominic knew men like Raymond thrived on returning, and this time he wouldn't allow it. Later that evening, after Lily fell asleep curled against her mother, Claire stood by the window, arms wrapped around herself. You didn't have to get involved, she said softly. Yes, I did. Why? He walked closer but kept respectful distance. Because I spent most of my life controlling everything around me, he said. Money, power, outcomes. She listened quietly. And then one night, he continued, a 6-year-old girl stood in a store, holding $2.17, trying to decide between food and bandages. Claire's eyes filled. That's not your responsibility. No, he agreed. But walking away would have been. She studied him, not the reputation, not the tailored coat, but the man. What did you lose? She asked gently. The question, sir, caught him off guard. My wife, he said after a long pause. 8 years ago. Cancer. I'm sorry, so am I. And your son? She pressed carefully. His jaw tightened. We don't speak. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was shared. You can't fix everything, Claire said. Dominic met her gaze. No, he replied, but I can fix this. That night, Dominic made another decision. Not from anger, from clarity. He arranged for Claire and Lily to move, not far still in Queens, but into a building with security, cameras, a doorman who owed Dominic a favor. When he told Claire, she resisted at first. I don't want to run. You're not running, he said calmly. You're choosing safety. And what do you want in return? The question was fair. Dominic didn't hesitate. Nothing. She searched his face for deception. Found none. You're not used to wanting nothing, she said quietly. He almost smiled. Maybe I'm learning. As the days passed, something deeper formed. Lily started drawing Dominic into her picture's tall stick figure in a black square coat. Claire began trusting his presence. And Dominic, powerful, calculating, feared, found himself doing something he hadn't done in years. He looked forward to tomorrow. But what he didn't know yet was that Raymond Doyle wasn't acting alone, and the debt Claire thought she owed was only a small piece of something much larger, something that traced back further than any of them realized. And when the truth surfaced, it wouldn't just threaten Claire, it would threaten everything Dominic had built. Dominic found out 3 nights later. It wasn't Raymond Doyle that worried him anymore. Raymond was small, desperate, predictable. What worried Dominic was the name that surfaced in Marco's voice at 2:17 a.m. Salvatore Carbone. The moment Marco said it, Dominic went still. Salvatore Carbone wasn't a street-level parasite. He was calculated, quiet, old school. A man who operated behind legitimate fronts: real estate, short-term loans, investment partnerships targeted at struggling families, and he had history with Dominic. Ugly history. You're sure? Dominic asked, staring out at the dark skyline. Positive, Marco replied. Raymond's been collecting for one of Carbone's shell lenders. Claire Bennett's loan was bought 2 months ago. Dominic's jaw tightened. How much? $3,000 originally. With penalties and compounding interest, they've inflated it to almost $30,000. Dominic let out a slow breath. $30,000. For a grieving widow who borrowed $3,000. Carbone wasn't after money. He was after leverage, and leverage meant pressure. Pressure meant fear, which meant Raymond's visit hadn't been emotional. It had been strategic. The next evening, Dominic stood alone in his private office, above Russo Holdings. He hadn't seen Salvatore Carbone in 6 years, not since a truce that divided territories and ended a quiet war neither of them wanted spilling into headlines. Carbone, sir, was older now. 62, silver hair slicked back, eyes sharp as broken glass. You look well, Dominic, Carbone said smoothly as he stepped inside. You don't, Dominic replied. They didn't shake hands. They didn't smile. They simply measured each other. I hear one of your lenders has taken an interest in a woman named Claire Bennett, Dominic said calmly. Carbone raised an eyebrow. Ah, the nurse. Dominic's expression didn't change. She's not part of our agreements. Carbone chuckled lightly. There's no agreement preventing legal loan acquisitions. Legal, Dominic repeated, voice low. Carbone walked toward the window, hands clasped behind his back. She signed paperwork. She defaulted. My people collect. By sending men into her apartment? Carbone turned slowly. That wasn't authorized. Dominic held his gaze. Both men knew that was a lie. What do you want, Sal? Dominic asked finally. Carbone's lips curved slightly. I want what I've always wanted. Dominic already knew the answer. Control, influence, leverage over the city's financial undercurrent. And Claire was a pressure point. "You've grown sentimental," Carbone said quietly. "That's dangerous at our age." Dominic stepped closer, voice steady. "She's not a chess piece. Everything is a chess piece." A long silence stretched between them. Then Carbone delivered the real move. "Your son met with me last month." The words hit harder than any threat. Dominic's face didn't change, but inside, something, sir, fractured. "You're lying, Damai." Carbone smiled faintly. "Anthony seems ambitious." Anthony Russo, the son who hadn't spoken to Dominic in 5 years. The son who believed his father's empire was built on blood and manipulation. The son who walked away. Dominic's pulse slowed not with panic, but with calculation. "What does this have to do with Claire?" he asked. Carbone's eyes gleamed. "Nothing, and everything." He stepped closer. "Your weakness is obvious, Dominic. A widow, a child. It makes you predictable." Dominic's voice dropped to a whisper. "Be careful." Carbone didn't flinch. "Step away from the girl," he said softly, "and this ends clean." There it was, the ultimatum. Protect your pride and your power, or protect the woman and child who had somehow slipped past your defenses. Dominic didn't answer. He simply turned and walked out, because he needed to think. And Dominic Russo never made emotional decisions. Except this was already emotional. Later that night, he sat alone in his penthouse, staring at an old photograph. Him, his wife, Elena, and Anthony at 16, before resentment, before distance, before Dominic chose power over presence. His phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number, a photo. Claire walking Lily to school that morning, taken from across the street. Dominic's blood ran cold. Another message followed. "Sentiment is expensive. No signature, no need." Dominic stood slowly. This wasn't about dead anymore. This was about dismantling him, sir. Piece by piece. And the most terrifying part? Carbone was right about one thing. Dominic had grown sentimental. Because when he closed his eyes, he didn't see territory maps or balance sheets. He saw Lily hugging his leg. He saw Claire's guarded strength. He saw a second chance he never thought he'd get. And for the first time in decades, he was afraid of losing something that mattered. The next day, Dominic went to Queens. He didn't tell Claire about Carbone. Not yet. Instead, he watched Lily from the park bench as she played on the swings. Claire sat beside him. "You're quiet," she observed. "Just thinking." She studied his face. "You look like a man about to go to war." He didn't deny it. "If I told you there might be more danger," he said carefully, "would you leave the city?" Her response was immediate. "No." To Claire, I'm done running. Her voice wasn't angry. It was resolute. "I won't let Lily grow up afraid." Dominic looked at her. Really looked at her. This woman bruised but unbroken, terrified but standing, and he realized something. Protecting them didn't mean controlling the situation from afar. It meant standing beside them, even if it cost him everything. That night, Dominic made his decision. Not as a mafia boss, not as a strategist, but as a man who refused to lose another family because of pride. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in years. Anthony answered on the third ring. A pause. Then, coldly, "What do you want?" "Dominic, sir." Swallowed something unfamiliar. Not fear. Regret. "We need to talk." Because if Salvatore Carbone thought he could use Dominic's past to threaten his present, he was about to learn something dangerous. Dominic Russo might have built his empire on power, but he would defend his family with something far stronger, and this time, he wasn't fighting alone. Dominic arrived at a small, dimly lit cafe in the Bronx, a neutral territory he controlled but didn't occupy. Anthony was already seated, arms crossed, eyes guarded. The years apart had sharpened the tension between them like a knife. "Sit," Dominic said softly. Anthony hesitated, then obeyed. "You called?" Anthony said flatly. "Yes," Dominic replied. "We need to talk about Carbone." Anthony's brow furrowed. "I don't know anything." Dominic studied him carefully. His son had grown taller, stronger, sharper, but there was something Dominic recognized, a sense of fear and loyalty tangled together. The same way he had felt when Lily had counted $2.17. "You helped him," Dominic said, calm but firm. Or at least you didn't stop him. Anthony flinched. It wasn't personal. You weren't here, and I thought I was right. Dominic leaned forward. This isn't right or wrong, Anthony. It's survival. Claire Bennett and her daughter are under threat. Salvatore Carbone is playing chess, and you're holding a piece. Anthony swallowed. So what do you want? To make it right, Dominic said simply. With me. With, sir. Them. You've got a chance to do the right thing before someone gets hurt. Anthony's jaw tightened. He had been raised on strategy, power, and survival, but the words his father spoke, words laced with authority, and genuine concern struck something in him he hadn't felt in years. Responsibility, loyalty, family. I'll help, he said finally. Dominic nodded. Good, but you follow my lead. That night, Dominic, Anthony, and Marco orchestrated a quiet, precise plan. Surveillance footage, background checks, and careful timing. Carbone thought he was untouchable, hidden behind layers of intimidation and money. But Dominic had something more powerful than wealth or fear: purpose. They struck silently. Raymond Doyle's recent movements were traced back to one of Carbone's warehouses. Dominic's men moved first, quietly containing the place. Anthony watched, learning. Dominic's calm control under pressure was an unspoken lesson in command, authority, and focus. When Carbone finally realized something was wrong, Dominic appeared at the warehouse entrance. His presence alone was enough to stop any hesitation in Carbone's men. The fear in their eyes was palpable. Dominic didn't raise a hand. He didn't shout. He simply stepped forward. "You've threatened the innocent," Dominic said, voice low and measured. "And now, your collection stops." Carbone sneered. "You think you can just—" Dominic cut him off. "I don't think. I act." He reached into his coat, not for a weapon, but for a device. Surveillance evidence, bank records, and documents compiled meticulously over the last week. Dominic handed them to Carbone. "Leave them alone," he said, "or this goes public. Your empire is legal only on paper. One leak, and you're finished." Carbone's arrogance faltered. For the first time in decades, he realized he had underestimated Dominic Russo. "You're sentimental," Carbone said bitterly. "No," Dominic replied, voice unwavering. "I'm careful. I protect what matters. And family matters more than pride." Carbone understood. And he disappeared that night, leaving his schemes in shambles. The following morning, Dominic drove to Queens, a rare quiet settling over him. Claire opened the door, Lily bouncing beside her. "Morning," Dominic said quietly. "Everything's settled." Lily's eyes widened. "You're safe?" Dominic smiled faintly. "Yes, you're safe." Claire studied him, measuring the calm authority that hid so much beneath it. "You didn't have to do this. I couldn't walk away," Dominic said honestly. "Not after what I saw. Not after Lily stood there counting her coins." She nodded silently, understanding more than words could capture. For the first time, Dominic felt something he hadn't allowed himself in years. Peace, not complete, not permanent, but enough to breathe. Lily ran to him, hugging his leg tightly. He knelt, arms wrapping around her in return. She laughed, small, free, unconcerned. And Dominic realized that protecting them wasn't just about eliminating threats. It was about being present, being steady, being part of their lives. Claire placed a hand on his arm. "Thank you." Dominic didn't respond immediately. He simply nodded, letting the moment linger. Words felt unnecessary. Actions had spoken louder. He finally straightened, looking down at the mother and daughter, safe and alive. And for the first time in decades, Dominic Russo allowed himself to hope, because power without protection meant nothing, but protection with love, patience, and presence, that could change everything. The past could be heavy. Mistakes could haunt. But Dominic knew some things were worth fighting for. And this family, however unlikely, was one of them. He stepped back, letting them breathe. Quietly, he promised himself, no one would ever make Lily count coins like that again. And if they tried, Dominic Russo would be waiting. Calm, prepared, unyielding. Sitting in his car afterward, Dominic exhaled slowly. The city stretched endlessly before him, chaotic, dangerous, alive. But he didn't feel the same emptiness he had felt before. He had faced threats, negotiated power, and seen the worst of people. But standing between Lily and danger, seeing Claire's cautious trust, He understood something essential. Life wasn't only about control. It was about what you chose to protect and who you chose to fight for. For once, Dominic wasn't alone in his fight. He smiled faintly to himself. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as it, sir, always did. But tonight, he had made a difference, and sometimes that was enough.